So one of the things that we have to do to move ourselves out of polarization is find some middle ground, find something that we have in common. And maybe that's the really big things of, I want there to be an economy that is strong enough to support me and the people I care about for financial stability at the very least, and maybe even success. I want all kids to be safe at school. Like, these are the questions that can start to bring people along and at least get us at the same table, and maybe even talking in the same language, right? Because you were talking about communication earlier, right? You have to send a message, you have to receive a message, you have to understand the message.
Welcome to Unpacked Culture Chronicles. I'm Danielle Marshall, an equity strategist and executive coach. This podcast explores the intersection of curiosity, culture, and connection, with practical strategies to help us bridge divides and build stronger relationships. Today, I'm excited to welcome Kai Stowers, a leadership coach and consultant who's passionate about transforming conflict into opportunities for growth and connection. Kai brings a wealth of experience in navigating complex team dynamics, fostering curiosity, and integrating compassion into the workplace cultures. In this episode, we'll explore how curiosity connects to empathy and how slowing down can help us respond thoughtfully to challenges. If you're navigating cultural differences or seeking ways to bridge polarization, this conversation is absolutely for you. So hi, Kai, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited to lean into this conversation. We have been colleagues and friends for a few years now, and you're really one of my favorite people to have conversations with, particularly around these topics. And we're talking about curiosity today, and cultural curiosity in particular. And what I appreciate most about the conversations that we do have is I never actually know where the conversations are going to lead. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what emerges today as we get into it. But before we get started, I really wanted to just invite you to introduce yourself to our listeners. Tell us a little bit about you, what you do, and why curiosity is a topic of interest for you.
Yeah, thank you, Danielle. I'm really glad to be here today. And likewise, I always enjoy our conversations. So a little bit about me is, so I run my own coaching and consulting business, and I work with leaders in the area of leadership development, of team development. I love supporting teams as they work through conflict and giving them tools so they can do that in a really productive and building way, rather than the way we normally think of when we think about conflict, of something that's destructive and needs to be avoided at all costs.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And yeah, that feels like there's going to be a lot of meat in there, and even what you just said, because we do tend to want to avoid these conversations and especially conflict, but it's not always a bad thing.
Right.
And it makes me think about something that even came out while we were initially preparing for the conversation today, that you mentioned that curiosity is deeply tied to empathy and compassion for you. And so I'm kind of wondering what your take is on how you see these qualities working together to create meaningful connections, how it, infuses with conflict, and what all of that looks like.
Yeah. So this connection between curiosity and empathy and compassion is something I learned when I was leading mindfulness at a biotech. And this was kind of back in the day where there was a lot of people at that biotech, including myself, who practice mindfulness. We're like, great, we have a mindfulness practice, but we're not going to talk about it at work because people aren't going to take it seriously anymore. So here I am. I'm trying to build a mindfulness program. I'm trying to, build acceptance for it. And there were some people, if I talked about compassion, they were like, oh, I feel so starved for this. They really leaned into it. And there were other people, when I talked about compassion, they would be like, well, isn't that going to make me weak? Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, what is another avenue to open this door? And I realized that curiosity is very similar and works in many of the same ways as compassion. Because if you think about something that you're deeply curious about, of how absorbed you can get into it, how that judgment of this is bad, this is wrong kind of drops out, that is a similar way of holding something as we do when we have compassion for it.
I'm just letting that sort of land on me, because I think that's a really powerful statement. It's to be able to simply sit with something.
Yeah.
And just embrace what is offered in that moment from that situation, from that context.
Right. And it doesn't even mean we have to like what's happening, because we can be deeply curious about a problem. And like scientists are great at this.
Yeah.
Like, what is this knotty problem that I want this problem to be solved, but I'm also really curious about how it works.
Yeah. I am appreciating that deeply because you, again, like if we can suspend judgment, like sometimes a statement is simply a statement. It's neutral.
Mm-hmm.
It only becomes something when we ascribe meaning to it. But before we add that meaning, what would it mean for us to then turn around and ask a question, right? To
Yeah.
be curious in that moment, to dig deeper.
And, sometimes we're not going to have the option of getting curious first. Like that judgment's
That
going
is
to be
fair.
there.
Yeah, that is fair.
And so sometimes it's like, oh, there's a lot of judgment here.
Yeah.
Maybe like, is there some curiosity I can bring?
Yeah. And I think that's a fair point also, because it is, while we may want groups to be curious, and I think this is true in the work that both of us do, sometimes it's one individual. It is maybe the facilitator. It might be someone who's in the, on the staff that can ask that smart question in that moment to like pause us so that we can sort of reevaluate sort of where we're heading as a group. But it's not always everyone. Like, and that actually brings up like a question for me as I'm thinking about this, like, how do you go about in your work, like even cultivating curiosity in people who might be a little kind of like the mindfulness practice, like, well, can we do that here? Like, is that
Yeah.
appropriate in a work setting?
Yeah. And I'll use a lot of examples from that work because I learned so much about leading change. And so part of that was I would try something. And the great thing about scientists is they will give you feedback.
Okay.
So and sometimes you talk about to people who are like, oh, I don't think I want to work with scientists because I'm going to get some, whole shot in my argument, and maybe me too. But the upside of that is how something lands with them. And if it doesn't land, then I'm like, okay, well, that didn't land. I'm not going to do that again. And I can go back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
The other thing that was really helpful is there were people who were really engaged and they wanted to see the mindfulness efforts succeed and grow. And so they would come to me and say, hey, here is a resource I really loved. And they weren't always the same resources that I had personally enjoyed. I'm like, oh, well, if this landed for the scientific community, let me bring that in.
Yeah. So that's interesting also, because I'm hearing two things in what you're saying. Like, number one is curiosity also provided a channel sort of for a feedback loop for you. So like, if the scientists are hearing what you're saying and they're like, man, let me tell you what I'm really thinking about in this moment. That's data, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not landing well. They're poo-pooing this particular piece of research. Like, there's something that's coming out of that informs how you then move next.
Yeah.
But this other thing that you brought up, which I absolutely love because I try to practice this myself, is like, as people are bringing in resources, again, they may not be the resources that I selected initially, but it could still be useful for group learning. And so like the curiosity that they're beginning to demonstrate in that moment is like, hey, you know what? I may not have loved the initial resource that was shared, but I am curious about this other piece. Like, can we talk about this?
Right. Yeah. And so having some humility as a facilitator that you don't know everything. This group might be new to you, even if you've been working with them for a little bit, they have so much more insight into their own lived experiences than we can as an outsider.
Yeah. I always tell my clients that, because I'm like, you're the expert in you. Oftentimes I'm just getting to know you. And so like that for me breeds curiosity off the top, because I want to know what I can about this individual. What do you like? What do you value? What's important to you in this moment? And I wonder sort of how you approach that, like as you're thinking about the work that you do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there always has to be a getting to know each other phase in work. I sometimes use different assessments to get a quicker read on just, what is the high level of where this group is? What are their strengths? What are their opportunities? I like to talk to them to hear, like, how do they see the problem or the opportunity? What matters to them, right? Because I can be speaking about, something that motivates me, but they might not care about that. There might be something else that's more important to them.
Yeah, that they're not connected to that particular thing.
Right. What is the thing that's driving them?
So one of the other things that you've mentioned to me in the past is that we all have curiosity about something.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, from your perspective, how we can extend that natural curiosity to culture, right? So these are the conversations that people are often afraid to have. They don't want to get it wrong. They don't want to step on anyone's toes. And so, if it feels unfamiliar or challenging, like how do we help people really cross that bridge and start thinking about curiosity when it comes to dealing with people that are of different social identities?
Yeah, I think the first step here is connecting this work to people's values. Like, why do you want to do this work? What does it matter to you? As an organization, what will you be able to do in the future that you can't do now as a result of this work? Right? Because, I mean, I love learning, but learning is challenging,
Of
or
course.
it can be challenging. So, what are we going to anchor ourselves to when the going gets tough? So, that's always that first step. And the second step that I found really helpful is to model some of my own learning experiences. And I would love to say that all of my learning experience has been, oh, I've read this thing and I had this insight and now I never make a mistake. But I am a human being and that has absolutely not been my journey.
Yeah.
So, of course, yeah. So, yes, you can learn from books and podcasts and all of this. But when we're having interactions with other human beings, we're going to get things wrong. We're going to have these unconscious beliefs show up in interactions, and we might be really embarrassed. We might step on someone's toes. We might hurt their feelings. And yes, we want to avoid that as much as possible. But what's even more important is that when it happens, we can be like, oh, like I am so sorry, and I'm
Yeah.
going to commit to doing better, rather than only going into that shame spiral. Like, you might also go into that shame spiral. I'm speaking
Sure.
from personal experience, but can you at least have a game plan of, I just learned something about myself that I don't really like, and
Mm,
I'm going to use that insight to do better in the future,
yeah.
rather than going into the shame, blame. Let me tell you all the reasons why I'm still a good person. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah,
I,
it's
I'm I'm smiling as you say this to me now because we've done a couple of podcasts and work engagements together, and in terms of like the humility that comes with realizing, even as we as facilitators and coaches, I'm like, we still get it wrong. And
yeah,
the reality is it's because we're human, right? But to be able to accept uh the feedback from someone, to be able to offer a humble apologies and say, like, to your point, this is what I'll do differently next time. I think that's really important. But I think it almost comes full circle back to what you started with this idea of your why. Like, if my why is deep enough
mhm,
that I'm here, I'm in this conversation, I am curious because I desire to get to know you. From a work outcomes perspective, it might be that I want us to be able to work more effectively as a team. I want to have a healthier culture, right? If I'm centering on that why, even when I make mistakes, that why is strong enough to bring me back to
right,
the point of why we're doing this in the first place.
yeah, 100%.
So one of the ways that we can obviously look at this is, curiosity can be used to improve our workplace cultures, to build stronger relationships with people, so forth. But then there's this other side that we're dealing with, and especially in today's society, where we have a whole lot of polarization, we have sort of high stakes environments that we're dealing with. And I'm wondering from your perspective, what you imagine to be true if we fail to embrace curiosity in these moments, right? So if we're polarized, high stakes, what's happening when we don't get curiosity right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're living that right now, and I don't know that I've talked to a single person who isn't concerned about the polarization that we're in. So I think intellectually we get, oh, yeah, this is not good for us and we need to find a way out of it. But knowing how to get ourselves and others out of it is a whole different thing. And the other thing I want to say is this is a normal and human interaction to
Mm.
become polarized when we feel like our values or our safety is under attack. So I don't want to blame people for feeling polarized. I think this is another area that we can bring curiosity and compassion for. And sometimes that first question is like, how do I just need to take care of myself in this moment? Like, is this a place that I even want to try to move myself out of polarization? Or like, is that armor I need right now?
Yeah, that's a powerful question to ask because I encounter that as well, where there are situations where protection of the
Yeah.
individual is what's needed. There
Right.
are identities, there are belief systems and values that are actually under attack, right? So it could
Yeah.
cost someone their life, their safety, physical safety, emotional safety, psychological, all the
Yeah.
things, simply because they believe or they live in a way that someone else disagrees with.
Right.
Um, and so, yeah, I completely agree with you there. But I'm finding what you said around, we're all sort of recognizing in this moment that we're polarized, right? So
Yeah.
what do we do about it? I think
Yeah.
that's profound as well, because it sounds often when people are talking to me, like, I understand that we're polarized, but these other people don't. And so like, and I'm like, but you do understand how polarization works, right? Um, where there are like two opposing views
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
it. But being able to accept that if I feel polarized right now and my
Yeah.
values are challenged,
Right.
what might also be true for this other person? And so I'd
Yeah.
love to just hear your thoughts.
Yeah. That first part is like, give yourself permission to go there or not.
Mm,
Right. And so if you know that you don't have the energy and the bandwidth, like this is one you can opt out of. And so, but having that actual freedom to choose rather than me just saying, hey, you always have to like be the bigger person and, get this thing out of polarization, that can become really oppressive. So I want you to really, and people to really have the choice
yeah.
on, am I going to do this work? To tie it in with their values of why is it important for me, even when things are polarized and I'm afraid and I'm expecting the worst out of the other side, why is it important for me to show up?
Yeah. As I hear you say that, I'm having a flashback to another podcast I listened to not too long ago, and the person was talking about relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and an individual said, "Well, why do I have to do this? What about this other group?" And I loved how the host responded in this moment, because he said, "Your job is to worry about you.
Yeah.
You cannot make someone else do their work," so to speak. And I feel like, particularly in given the DEI space, racial equity, LGBTQ plus issues, like all the things that we've been talking about, you keep hearing this dialogue of like, do your work. We want other
Right.
people to do their work. But at the end of the day, we are responsible each of us is responsible for doing our work. And so like, as I'm thinking about polarization, it's the same. To your point of like, why am I showing up in this moment? Why am I
Right.
taking a stand on this issue? That is very personal.
Yeah. 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 And there's a question that I often give my clients and I try to live by it as well, which is, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective?
I've heard you say that before.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Sometimes I want to be right, Kai.
Yep.
Sometimes
Yep.
I want
Completely understandable.
to be.
But that question of, do I want to be effective? Then that can start to open up curiosity about
Yeah.
what actually does it mean to be effective right now? Does it mean calling this person names? Does it mean calling this person ignorant? I mean, that's probably in
Yeah.
the I'm right and you're wrong category. Sometimes being effective is, this conversation is not going anywhere and there's
100%.
better places to put my energy.
100%. Yeah. You say it as, do you want to be right or effective? And I think about it also as, what's my end goal?
Right.
Because sometimes, like, if you can put your mind on your end goal, I want to protect my relationship. I actually want to be more effective in the workplace. I would like to, I'd like to have a peaceful, even if it's a holiday meal with my family, right? Like there are things that one could say, this is the
Yeah.
goal, this is my intention.
Mm-hmm.
In those moments, like if I'm sitting down for, Thanksgiving, Christmas, whatever Hanukkah, whatever meal it is, and someone is decided that they're now a vegan, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to get in on the finer points of like why you need to eat meat with this individual if my goal is to simply keep the peace, to enjoy my family, right? And
Right.
so I take that back into the context of work, where I think sometimes we lose the point of why we're gathered. I
Right.
just want to say this thing to you because someone's got to tell you, and no one's ever said this to you before. That's why you behave this way. And I'm like, but is that in service of your goal?
Right. Right.
And to be fair, people have different goals. So I don't know where they're coming from, but like that sparks curiosity for me as well. Tell me a little bit about what you're trying to achieve here.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's also that question of, do we need everyone to be perfect? And perfect, of course, is according to us. Like, so it's some
Yes.
arbitrary status that we've decided. Does everyone need to be perfect in order to come together for a common goal? Like, can we allow us to be human and imperfect and messy? And yes, we want people to learn and, not like step on each other's toes all the time. But can we be human and different and imperfect and still work together towards a common goal?
Yeah. What a beautiful question, right? Because there is no such thing as perfection. And yet, what do we keep striving towards?
Right.
Right?
Especially when we get polarized, that whole middle drops right out, and there is perfect and there is wrong.
Yeah, right. There's my way, or there's this other way, this other thing you do. It's completely wrong. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
like that is a challenge, though. But like, I look at it almost as grace, right? Like that's my background, and so like I lean on religion in that way. Like, am I offering grace in this moment to this other person, to myself, in terms of how we both show up? Understanding that we can both be triggered by things. We both have different value systems attached to the issue that we're talking about. Like, there's a lot that can potentially come out of there when we're able to step back for a second.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And
Um,
I'm thinking of an example of me, like when I'm like, so I started off as a chemist, and I now do this coaching and consulting work with like the messiest of human problems. And there was a lot of learning and growth that needed to happen along that way. So for folks who are listening, I'm a white person, and there was a lot I needed to learn about race and bias and unconscious bias and the way that lived in me. And one of the earlier stages of this was when I first was seeing a lot of racial bias and microaggressions that I'd literally been missing before. I became very judgy of all of the other white people who were doing this thing that I was doing 5 minutes ago.
yeah.
And that was part of my work, and I will probably always be part of my work, is how can I make more space for things I was doing 5 minutes ago or 5 years ago or, 10 years ago? If I can say, hey, I was able to learn and grow and get better at these things, not perfect, but
Mhm,
better,
mhm,
like,
mhm.
can I make room for the fact that other people are going to have learning journeys?
Yeah, I absolutely love that. It's your story, right? And so you've experienced this and you've grown as a result. And I equally see that in my own communities, multiple communities where someone has learned something new,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what, right? I've learned something new. Therefore, I have a moral,
Right.
superiority in this moment. I can take the high ground, whereas you haven't read enough, you haven't talked to enough people, you haven't done the work. And I think that gets back to sort of this challenge. Like I've shared with a lot of people in the past, like for me, when 2020 happened and there were all of these protests that were going on around the country, I did not find myself physically at these protests. And people said, how can you possibly do the work that you do and you're not there? Now, like, I will readily admit, one of the other communities I belong to is a community of anxious people, right? Like crowds of folks. It really brings up something in me that is not healthy.
Yeah.
And so I channeled my energy into the things that I can do well. Like, I'm like, I have a public audience. I am a consultant. I am a coach. Like, there's so many ways I can talk to people just on a regular basis. There's so many other ways for me to do this work. I need to be able to do that and not only fall into this narrow description,
Right.
like your point of like what is appropriate in this moment.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering like how, especially when we talk about cultural differences and polarization, like how can we even within our own groups, quite
Yeah.
frankly, our own social identities, open this up a little bit more so that there's spaciousness for us to simply be who we are as
Right.
individuals.
Right. And a lot of that work is the more room we can make for ourselves to be individuals and human and messy and complex, the more room we're going to be able to make for other people to
Mm.
be human and complex.
Whew. Yeah, that one's landing here. Like as
Yeah.
I say that, it's landing on my heart because I think you're right. Like when people seem to have the most adverse reactions when they are most triggered, it is often not about the other person.
Don't you hate that?
I
Especially when you're
absolutely.
the one who's triggered.
So like, hello, listeners, I am not talking specifically about you because Danielle is part of the problem here. I also get triggered by things, but
Yeah.
the strategies that I'm starting to use more and more of are that I'm pausing to be like, what is coming up in me right now? Like,
Right. Yeah.
why am I having the reaction? Where do I feel it in my body? What is
Yeah.
it that I'm noticing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, so since we're in agreement there, let me ask you this, Kai. Just what do you use as a strategy, like when you feel like you're triggered in that moment, but you want to stay curious, you want to stay with people?
Hmm.
How do
Hmm.
you kind of dial it back for yourself so that you can be present?
Yeah. That's just slowing things down. Like that, I can have a very quick wit, which
Yeah.
can be fun.
Absolutely.
It can also get me in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, yeah.
So slowing things down, I've done a lot of work to be present in my body. And so now I kind of know of like, if I feel it, if I feel tense or if my heart is racing or, my jaw is clenched, I should probably just shut up for a bit so that I can understand like what's happening here. Like, is this a conversation that actually I do need to have because this person has crossed the line and their behavior is inappropriate? Um, is this because I am not doing well and I just don't have any bandwidth for any level of frustration right now? And maybe that's a time where I need to give both myself and the other person some grace. So that slowing down, that pause,
Yeah,
that,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Um, I'm appreciating that because I think about some of the language that I've been using lately. And it will depend, I think, on the situation, right? For all of us and quite frankly, how you are personally doing in that moment. But I think there have been times where I've literally had to say, like, to another person or to a group, I am triggered right now,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm experiencing something because of a statement that was made, and I need a 2 minute break.
Right.
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 Or, sometimes I might not be as willing to have that conversation about the fact that I am triggered in there, but I am watching other people,
Right.
whether that is in person, I'm facilitator, or even on Zoom, and I'm just watching the body language in this moment.
Oh,
And I'm
yeah.
like, you know what? Let's just take 2 to 3 minutes to reflect, right? And just give people a chance to have a breather.
Hmm.
So like finding those strategies, and I by no means say like I am perfect in this. I think I'm still learning as we go. But for all the things that I do for my teams that I'm working with, they're also, I think, prescriptive for me, right? Like in that moment, it's self-medicating because it's like, I got to figure a way to kind of calm myself down, to have my heartbeat slow. What are the things that I know to do as go-to strategies? What might work in this situation?
Yeah. And what different teams need varies a lot because there's some teams that they want to have these conversations about, hey, when we get triggered, what happens? How do we work through this? There's other teams that are much more task oriented, and I
Yeah.
might need to break some of this down individually with people in one-on-one coaching because the group really does not want to do group processing.
Yeah, of course.
And
Or there may
so
not be a place where they can do it just
true,
yet.
true. Yeah. Yeah.
Especially if they're not hearing one another. Like I do think that that is a big challenge when it comes to like leaning into curiosity, talking about differences. Like if we can't hear, or
Hmm.
we're not willing to believe the statement
Right.
that another person has made, right? Two different issues, but they're ultimately going to bring you back to the same place. Like we're not communicating because the communication requires a message be sent, a message be received and understood. And somewhere along this line, right, like it's breaking down to a
Yeah.
place where it's not happening.
Right. Right.
Um, and so that brings me kind of to this other question that I wanted to ask, and it's more around like when you encounter beliefs or behaviors that you disagree with, how do you find that curiosity can help move beyond judgment to understanding,
Yeah.
particularly when we're talking about like across social identities?
Right, right, right. So I'm going to go back to like one of my beliefs and values is that polarization is a place of suffering. When we are judging someone else or ourselves, it is actually a pretty painful place to be.
Mm.
So that's one of my motivations for doing the uncomfortable work on, what do I do when I come across someone who doesn't share my values? And right now, politics, we have this new president who was elected. His campaign spent $215 million on really horrific ads attacking the trans community. He has promised to do a lot of horrible things to the trans community starting on day one. he is not someone that I'm interested in having compassion for or understanding around. But there are many people who lean conservative who voted for him who I believe are good people, even if we are on this other side of the issue. So I do a lot of self-reflection on what if my candidate was the really hurtful, dangerous candidate, but I was looking at my choices to vote for them or to vote for someone who wasn't going for my beliefs. I'm like, what would I do? I don't know. I could
Yeah.
see how that would be a struggle for me.
Yeah. I am. I hope people take that question to heart because I don't think that's something that we frame in discussion ever. Like I've never heard anyone ask that. Like, what if it were my candidate? But there's something about them that I still align with. It may not be everything. And
Right.
we've heard that time and
Yeah.
time again because even the people who have supported him do not align on every front. And I think about it from my political leanings. Even when I do support a candidate, there's likely going to be some areas we are still not in alignment on.
Agreed. Agreed.
And so, in understanding that if that can be true for me, if it can be true for you, then it is also true for others.
Yeah.
So, what do you do with that?
Right. Right. Another thing I try to remind myself of, if you poll people, trans issues are really not high on the list. Things like the economy are way higher up on the list of people's priorities. And so can I hold that a lot of the people who voted for Trump really, they don't care one way or the other about trans rights. And yes, that indifference is problematic, but it's not problematic to the same degree of some of these politicians who are saying we want to eliminate trans people from public life. Like, there can be a difference in degree of, I thought the economy was way more important and I'm voting on that. And do I even know what's happening to the trans community? A lot of people don't.
I am, yeah, I see within that, like, there are a couple of things that surface. Like, there's the apathy, right? Like, that's not my issue. I just really don't
Yeah.
care one way or another. But there's also, I think we have to hold space for, in your example, like, there's hurt that comes with it, right? Like, we are hurt because other people simply don't seem to recognize our pain, our needs. They don't
Right.
seem to care in this moment. But I think what I am learning maybe on my journey, and I don't think it's going to apply for everyone, but I am also finding that in these moments, because my community was also adversely impacted by the election, and
Yeah.
will continue to be for the next couple of years, there's some freedom for me in understanding how people are leaning.
Right.
Because if you have sort of a position of being apathetic towards me, if you don't care, if it doesn't bother you, that hurts me. But I also know where you stand.
Yeah.
And so, like, I am not looking to you to solve my issues anymore. I am looking to me. I am looking to my community. I'm looking to people who are allies in that way to stand alongside with me. And so it is not meant to corner off or build walls around people, but I also realize, like, there's no point in literally talking to the wall. Like, there are some times where you just can't get through to someone. And so instead of wasting that particular breath, I'm more inclined to seek out people who might be middle ground or people that are already actively working on the issues that I care about.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say, and the reason, I mean, I don't know if I have hope for the short term, but for the long term, if somebody isn't invested in an issue either way, they are up for play.
Yes, I agree.
Right.
Middle ground. That's what I call them, middle ground people.
Yeah. And one of the other things I try to remind myself of, if we have such a narrow vision that only the true believers who already believe everything that we believe are going to be on board, there is no hope for social change.
Yeah.
Like, what is this vision we are going to lean into that is big enough that it brings more people along?
Yeah. Well, and Kai, I think you're hitting on the thing that, like, has irked me from the beginning of time with this, right? So we talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion, all of these things. And I think we still continue to get diversity wrong.
Yeah.
Because diversity has been weaponized in this country to mean other.
Yeah.
And if it is always going to mean other, it means trans, it means gay, it means Black, it means Asian, it means all of these other things other than white, male, cisgender, Christian, right? Like, other than those things, able body, right? Like, if you are outside of those ranks, now we have to have diversity to support you. But I think the irony in this is that if you were to actually look at a definition, diversity was always designed to mean all of us.
Yeah. It's about the group. It's not about the individual. Yeah.
Yes. And so if it's about the group, again, to your point, it's like we can't just say, well, I'm only going to work with people who either represent my identity or believe what I believe, right? There's some shared value system, because that's why I think we're having like such, again, polarization and people pulling, whether it be right, left, or any other direction you want to go in this case. It's because they don't see themselves represented. I hear you talking about your needs in this moment, but what about me?
Right.
And so like, I'm trying to figure out like where that middle ground is, because it's hard right now. Like we may very well have different value systems.
Yeah. 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 So one of the things we have to do to move ourselves out of polarization is find some middle ground, find something we have in common. And maybe that's the really big things of, I want there to be an economy that is strong enough to support me and the people I care about for financial stability at the very least, and maybe even success. I want my kids to be safe. I want all kids to be safe at school. Like, these are the questions that can start to bring people along and at least get us at the same table and maybe even talking in the same language, right? Because you were talking about communication earlier, right?
Yeah.
You have to send a message, you have to receive a message, you have to understand the message.
Yep. And I think I'm a big proponent of that piece in particular, is like, can we get to common language around things? There's so many terms that are being thrown around. Like, I just gave the example of diversity, but the other thing that like just gets under my skin every time I hear it is, and you know what it is, it's like, are you woke enough? And I'm like, do you understand what woke means? Like, I feel like we just like to use buzzwords, and we have got to stop that. And I mean that inside my community. I mean it external to my community. I'm like, do you understand what we're talking about? Or if someone introduces a concept, can you pause long enough to say, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. Yeah. Right? But I also think there's reasons we like those buzzwords. It's because it instantly allows us to sort people into in-groups and out-groups. And
yes.
And the reason we like that is our evolutionary heritage, where we were, small families, bands, tribes, and coming across another band or another tribe could mean the extinction of your group. So we have this inherent mistrust of outsiders. So knowing that can sometimes help us like not lean so far into it that we're getting in our own way.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing in like sort of the evolution, the biology of like how all of this sort of evolved over time. And as I think about us right now, like we should be evolved enough as human beings today, should be able to sit with the question of, is our behavior, because maybe this is something that in fact we did thousands of years ago, because it was even hundreds of years ago. It was a protective strategy. It meant the extinction of our people if we were not careful. And yet, is it the right strategy for today? Right? Again, like, is it in service of this goal that I have, or is it just some thing that I'm actively engaged in and I'm just kind of doing it mindlessly without being intentional?
Yeah. And this is the question for anybody who wants to continue to grow as a human being. This is anyone who wants to develop their leadership, is how do I become aware of and balance my instinctive responses versus slowing down enough that I can actually remember the strategies and values and goals I have for myself.
Yeah. I that feels important. Every year you hear people talk about at the top of the year, it's like, well, it's January. What are your resolutions? What are your intentions for the year? And whether or not you agree with that as a particular strategy, I do think that there's something really interesting about examining your values. Like, are my values the same today as maybe they were a year ago, 5 years ago? Because mine aren't. Mine have shifted. And I'm okay with that, right? Like, and I think that's another piece of it. Are we okay for ourselves to continue to grow? I have heard so many conversations, particularly in, I would say, the last 2 months, where people have challenged others for changing their perspectives on things.
Yeah.
And I find that quite ironic, because especially in a workplace setting, I would hope that we would get to change our perspectives on things, that we would be able to change because we have new information, because We have someone that we care about in our lives who's impacted by a particular issue, ourselves, family members, whomever, friends. I want us to grow. And the very idea that, people will say like, oh, you're talking out of both sides of your neck, right? Like, I don't know which side or your mouth. I'm making up things now. You're talking out of both sides of your mouth, right? I don't know where you stand on this issue. I think it's fine to question where someone stands, but like the questioning the growth that's happened, that feels
Yeah.
really counterintuitive to me.
And when we change in any way, right? Whether it's changing perspective, maybe, I think of when I came out as queer, when I came out as trans, I think of people who divorced or lost a spouse. When we change in some way, we ask everyone around us to change as well.
Yes.
And that's uncomfortable. And some people are going to roll with it, right? They're going to just level up with you. And some people are going to say, I'm not ready for this. I liked you the way you were before better.
Yeah. Yeah. And some people are going to choose to step away because of that.
Yeah.
And we don't get to control that. We simply get to control our behavior in that moment and our
Right.
actions.
But this is where having some understanding and compassion and empathy can give us more room, because we can likely say, there's somebody I know who changed and I didn't like it. And I was the one who stepped away.
Yeah.
That can sometimes help things feel less personal.
Mm. Yeah, I think something that feels like it's a thread through much of what you've been sharing today is like, how do we reconnect it back to like, when have I been in this situation? Whether it be when have I been triggered, when have I been questioned, you fill in the blank on this, right? Because it is, if we can see ourselves as humans in this moment, right, and have empathy for our own experience and compassion for our own experience, might we then be able to apply that to the next person?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's powerful. So Kai, I want to, just as a closing couple of questions, I'd love for you to offer listeners any advice or thoughts that you have when it comes to navigating cultural differences. Like if someone's saying that they really want to lean into this, but they're afraid of it, what would you tell them?
I'm going to think of the things that have worked for me. And one is to trust yourself, because if we take on work that's too hard, it's too challenging for where we are, it can actually move us backwards. Okay. So I'm thinking back in 2020 and people are like, you need to read all of these anti-racist books. And I couldn't read them. I would just dissociate. Like that wasn't work that was appropriate for me. And I found other places that were more body-based, like Resmaa Menakam's work. He wrote a book called My Grandmother's Hands. Like there were other steps I needed to do before reading about some of the most painful parts of our history in the United States. Like there was healing I needed to do before I could hold that level of trauma.
Yeah. Let me ask a follow-up question to that, because I am both appreciating what you're saying, and I can see some people maybe using that as their out.
Right. And this is where it's so hard. This is so hard.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
we don't always know. But one thing I can say is if we push people too fast and too hard, we wind up moving them into polarization. And so this is a thing that is so painful, because I can feel the urgency of the work and I'm like, we need to do this work. We need to go faster. But also winding up in polarization is a terrible end result. So I struggle with this, and I don't know the answer. But one thing I know right now is we are in polarization, and the next step is just to find common ground.
Yeah. Yeah. I am that feels so important, and yet reasonable and yet difficult all at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's where we need to go, because it feels like worst case scenario, we're going to destroy one another.
Right.
Because we want to be right so badly.
Yeah.
And that doesn't leave me hopeful. Go ahead.
And for all of the groups who are marginalized, it's like we actually need other people to recognize our humanity. We need other people to help us change these systems and structures. So it's not that we're being unreasonable. It's that our strategies might not align with these long-term goals. And that is, it is a tough thing to hold.
Yeah. Oh, we could have a whole nother conversation about that topic alone. That could be an hour-long podcast.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
So Kai, I wanted to give you a little bit of time to tell me what's new in your business. I know you're introducing your own podcast. Let's talk about that.
All right. Well, at the behest of some of my friends who have been urging me for months to start my new podcast, I have finally done that. It is launching January 7th.
Okay, coming up.
It's coming up. And some folks saw me at a conference and I kept on having these mic drop moments. And they were like, you need to get your own hashtag. We're going to make t-shirts. Like, it was fun. It was playful. And so the format of this is I have folks call in, leave a voice note, or just upload a voice file with a question. So it could be a question about team dynamics of how do I work with this coworker? There's a lot of room for diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. And then I just answer that question. So you can find me on Apple Podcasts. You can find me on Spotify. You can sign up for my newsletter so you receive all of the notifications right to your inbox. That's at kaispeaks.substack.com.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Kai. This has been like a delightful conversation. And I think there's just so much more that we can continue to unpack here. So I invite you back if you ever want to be a guest again. I might even secretly call into your show with my own questions.
Absolutely.
What you can come up with. But I really, really appreciate it, as always, just having a chance to sit down and connect with you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I always love talking with you. So this has been a delight.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me and Kai Stowers on this episode of Unpacked Culture Chronicles. I hope Kai's insights on curiosity, compassion, and finding common ground inspired new ways to approach cultural challenges and foster connection. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. And remember, building bridges starts with curiosity. Until next time, be well.